Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Death Session 47. That's where we're at. And I'm back into my normal environment. Not exactly back to normal, but back to familiar. Because what is normal and what is normal moving forward from, a loss and also the grieving process as a support person and also someone affected, but certainly more as in a support person. And there are ceremonies as we speak that I was unable to attend, and yet I wonder why. And that is the kind of quagmire of modern living that I am trying to solve the code or solve the riddle or solve the place where I can figure things out for me in my life, for people I need to show up for, and the misinterpretations and the things that maybe I've gone off track about as I ponder this sort of different phase, or where I'm at just today. Forget about phases. I think that's part of the inherent problem, is that I tend to see things in a narrative way. And I tend to see things in a hero's journey way, or as a character in a ideal story. Similarly to how I guess we all are kind of indoctrinated or uplifted. I'm not trying to be judgmental, by the Bible, by our grade school, if we got that kind of teaching, CCD for me, and things like that. And just the baked in the cake limits of our spheres and limits of our understandings. And, I usually look to the arts for some of these answers, because I have a notion and a theory that the artist goes first, that before a submarine was an actual thing, it was dreamed up by Jules Verne, and then I guess that's where engineering steps in to see if they can make any of that nonsense possible. And so, in a way, I like to link to that lineage of the dreamer and the person who, quote unquote, takes the moon shot, and then let the other people, not that they are any less than, it's just that everybody has to contribute to make these things change. And so that's kind of what leaves you despondent today, because we're not we're all contributing to our own crummy feeling, and I can cop to that in terms of what I'm digesting. And to the degree that other than beating myself up about it, some of it is inescapable. And I mean that because if you go to a supermarket, or if you have to interact with people, you are still getting feedback from that captured person, whether you know it or not. If you do not participate in social media whatsoever, you can cop to saying, I'm not participating in that. I don't have anything to do with raising my cortisol levels to where I'm stressed out. I don't watch gory videos. I keep everything kind of neat and clean. I eat clean, and I digest media that's it's all Vivaldi, and it's all fine novels. Even if you are that uncorrupted by that, when you are interacting with stressed people because they're in it, they do affect you, and you are minimally, you still are encountering it, which would then, even though this sounds like a bleak start, which to me says that's how interconnected we are, that you can choose with every metric of abstaining, you will still be affected by the things going on in this world culturally, seismically. You can be, in a fire that started this year in California, that'll take away your ability to ignore like nothing else. And losing someone certainly will do the same. And so I guess that's where I'm at. And where things fall short, or where I misinterpret, is what is really sort of perplexing me at the time, at this time. Because we grieve in houses of worship, the clergy and the lead pastor and or priest, whichever denomination, rabbi, they get the last word, and they get most of the word, and they deign to allow people who knew the person passing, they deign to let them speak sometimes, and not often in the Catholic tradition you don't get that opportunity, or maybe, I don't know, and that's fine, I get it, but again, as being only men, these leaders will tell you that it's not about the specific, it's about the macro, the worship ceremony. That I don't need to know who I'm eulogizing because I am well versed in the verses of the Bible, or I am the guy who went through all this training to be offering a service, and and I know best, and I don't mean that to be a cutting thing. And I think if at anything there are levels, and I'm not particularly talking about a specific disgruntlement, so before I get off track on that, I think some of these things are mercifully done by others who have the training, but I certainly put a little bit more, it's sort of the difference between a doctor and a physical therapist, or a nurse and a doctor. The nurses that do your day-to-day, or the physical therapist that does the day-to-day, don't have the authority of the doctor. They don't have the authority of, let's say, the pastor or the priest. But they're the people really helping you through, and then there's friends, and then there's the kind words and the well-timed gesture, the beautiful tradition in Italian American enclaves is, food. I think that's a general, that doesn't just exist in Italian, but those trays of baked ziti that come over, all that's outside of the purview of the church and how we help each other. And so I know we have to go through these rituals, and then the state gets involved because of mortuary science and because of laws of burial and all this stuff that gets in the way of who's really got the inside track to what's to be said, what's to be done, what's to be celebrated. And it goes back to everybody's individual. If there's 50 people there, they're all grieving in a different way. They all have a different recollection. They all had a different relationship. And to the degree that it is important to share or to know, or I just think you can't let some of these life-changing things not change your life. And I wasn't always able to face that. And I'm not saying I am now. And it's a lot easier when you're in-law status, or you're a bystander, and it's not, and all you're doing is suffering vicariously. And if you don't make it about yourself, then that, this is a tough passage for somebody you care about, and your stuff can take a back seat. But where I have misinterpretations, I think, if you, I talk about Rocky, I've talked about Rocky before, and I think I've misinterpreted some of the lessons because you got that message as a child, you enjoyed, also wrestling and things like that. Like we enjoyed the idea, or the story of Rocky, is that he didn't win in the first one, but he went the distance, which means he took a beating, which is similar to a Christ journey, that he took a beating, and then he doesn't win at the end. And so you're like, but then if you follow Stallone's sort of slogan about everything is keep punching, maybe some offense, and maybe he was smart enough to set up a sequel by not having him win, but like almost winning, and then he developed skills, and then he got quick, and then Rocky 3 and blah, the whole thing. And it's all a very fun and concocted scenario. But if you absorbed as a real young person that suffering is purifying in some way, or suffering is the way to go. For me, that maybe has become too much of an association of virtue. And certainly as an artist, with the starving artist, the struggling artist, which is really just a way to set up a victory narrative, which is really just a way to set up the hero's journey. But in your life and in the world we know, there are people not suffering and going on offense. And you can debate about whether or not that is right or wrong. That's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you have things holding you back, or I have things holding myself back, then the idea that suffering is virtuous, and then anything like succeeding or anything like providing or making bank or just being able to do what you want to do is not as virtuous, then that's where I can see a big misinterpretation on my part. And learning from the examples of admirable people in my life, being able to go on the offensive economically, or whatever it is your path is, and to acquire some means, it's just a way to show up for people. If you really, so that's the fork in the road. So nothing is inherently, I guess, evil about obtaining wealth. It's the, I guess, where the judgment part is, what do you do with it, and and it doesn't mean you give it away, or it could mean that. It just means that you and I think it can go back to the ego of self. If just for your own self regard, if you have means to show up for particular things that don't require too much hardship to do, then you would do it. You'd be more available. You'd be more loving. You'd be able to show up or to support in these times. And hopefully, this is all sort of sounding pretty heavy. It just gives you the chance to enjoy life and the beauty of the world. And the counting your blessings can come from very humble places, because what else do you need but 3 squares and a cot, right? But of course we want more, and we need more, and being able to have a full life, and to think about, what you might be doing here, and what you want to do moving forward after these things. And so what I mean is, in these collective mourning ceremonies and things, you will encounter people and their neuroses, and it's a very vulnerable time, and so you got to be very graceful, but you understand that we're all in a society, and that's even too limiting, because the idea of also being just a fellow human, that's really what it comes down to. And that's why I lean into the art of and I'm starting to hopefully it's engineering forward and not reverse engineering, and you do get when you're writing, so let's get on track with the death session and the show. When you're writing, and you write from this refined place of thought and feeling, and you say something like I say in my show, that I thought that my best contribution and the way I saw art was that it would make me feel less lonely, and then the byproduct is it would make someone else feel less lonely. And that's a great sentiment, and if that were why people got headshots, then we'd probably have better art and better people. But that is, for me to mean that and to say that, probably took me several decades, because maybe that wasn't what it meant for me in the first place, but it did. It did make me feel less lonely to have my talent bring people to me like a moth to a flame. I talk about kind of a second awakening, or a rebirth as a guy who got attention that way, but because I was raised Catholic, and even if it wasn't as crammed down my throat or dogmatic as It could have been, and I didn't have to go to church, and I didn't go to Catholic school. I went to public school. But that stuff does get into you. I would imagine I tried to live fairly morally, even in this early discovery of being the center of attention. And while that may have been too important to me for a while, to stick with it, it has to mean more, because you can't be less the center of attention than to see and to know people in your peer group, on stages and on television, and shouldn't be taken personally. You should be excited for them and know that someday that could be you. So it can't be about attention in the first place, or in the second place when you find out what it is you're really after. And the idea that it made me feel less lonely, and it made me feel like I was connecting. And so if I write that I wanted to make people feel less lonely, that could be, seen as being overly virtuous about, wanting to be the next De Niro or whatever, or Pacino, or whatever my early aspirations were. It was probably more comedically based. But that leads you to think also about the spiritual connection for me. A one-man show hopefully could be funny. It could be stand-up. It could be experimental. It could be a cabaret. It could be a review of songs. It could be a lot of things. But it could be, God forbid, in certain circles of actors and artists as rebels, it could also be a sermon from the gospel according to yours truly, or whoever is up there. And maybe that's where I'm leaning, and that may be a bit of a turnoff to the mass appeal I am courting, but I guess the megalomania can start when you say, at least if I do this and get a few eyeballs on and get a few butts in the seats, that people will see it from my point of view. And the ego has to say my point of view is worth it and unique and just as valuable as any other point of view. And you may be saying that because I'm going to put it on stage and I'm going to throw lights on it and throw money into it, that mine is actually more worth paying attention to. I don't know how much of that is true in my case, but I do know, and I mentioned it last week, that I have acquired some skill sets, and I can really get through. I can get through some words, and I can get through them with feeling, and I can get through them with humor, and that may be a baseline. And I think, and that's the low end of it, and at the high end of it, I think I can, because if you're channeling and you believe that it doesn't come from the ego, it comes from the ether or from above, whatever feeling you want to say, that you are channeling, and why wouldn't that be as worthy as any other? And so I guess the theme this week is trying not to associate virtue with struggle, which is not to say that things should be easy. I certainly couldn't ask for things, what appealed to me and didn't appeal to some people about Carnegie Mellon when I was a young lad was how intense it was. And at the audition even, and in the brochures, but mostly at the audition, they played a video, and the guy who wound up being the associate head and who I got to know when I finally got in, he was sort of pitching it and saying it was intense and that it was a boot camp for actors, and that appealed to my sense of it was going to be difficult, and that to get through that would be worth and purifying and all that kind of thing, galvanizing, that kind of thing. And it wouldn't have appealed to certain people who said it should be more about fun and expression and not being so indoctrinated. And those are valid points too. And, but I think if I was associating with the idea that struggle is virtue, then that's where I was maybe aligned with something. And it was in Pittsburgh, which is a steel town. And it, it had a lot of, I was already concocting this, hard scrapple backstory before I even knew what hard scrapple was, because I really wasn't raised hard scrapple, And like I said, I won't share who, and I won't share maybe it was another school in the BFA. There's a lot of BFA programs out there, but I had a buddy, and he's done quite well, and he read my book, and we're kind of the same age. He's doing quite well, and nice guy, but I didn't know, I knew him as a guy before I knew him as an actor. But when I found out where he went, and he found out I went to Carnegie Mellon, and he read my book, and, he would say that while he was at his BFA program, which was a very good one, that he would, when things were going a little less than, when a professor was a little frustrated with people's work ethic, that they would say, hey, before you get all worked up about the workload, or before you start thinking we're pressing you, this ain't Carnegie Mellon. Like, the reputation amongst these league schools was that some were more strenuous than others, right? And some kicked you out, and they don't do that anymore. I guess they're harder to get into, but they're not. They were hard to get into when I got to, and they were hard to stay in. Now they're harder to get into, and you stay unless you decide to leave. And that's probably more humane, probably more of a way to go about it. But again, it's starting to unravel a little bit that I may have associated struggle with virtue, and that's not the case. And I guess I'm just sort of at my limit of struggling, of limiting beliefs, of not seeing possibilities where possibilities are, because going back to the tail end of my injury, I'm still gimpy on one. Now the good leg is messed up, and I'm not sure about what's going to happen in the future. And I know I'm going to do the show, but I don't know how I'm going to move forward with all this knowledge of, being a bystander to some grief that was high time for me to be in that support role. But the struggling is not a virtue. Healing is a virtue, and coming out the other end of inevitable struggle is the virtue. But the actual struggle in and of itself is meaningless in and of itself. And I guess what that is now opening up for me is that success is not always a consequence of larceny. It's not always the consequence of nepotism. And all these negatives that I have piled on to the anti-virtue of succeeding, or being wealthy, or having what you need and then some, all of these disassociations, or all of these harsh, have been repellent to those things that I want, and then very conveniently say, well, why aren't they happening to me? Well, maybe because you're not trained on that as a possibility. And that's what seeing someone who we've lost in my family units, someone who started a little rougher than I ever could or could cop to, and then raising the heights of where that person went, and then knowing the person and knowing that there wasn't malice, and there was some good fortune, but there wasn't any malice in the acquiring and the learning and the amassing of good fortune and wealth and these things. So then I guess the antidote to all these indoctrinations and misinterpretations and miscalculations is that meeting people that belie a falsely held belief, meeting people can change you, and people can change you. And yes, stories can, and words can change you, but it's really people. It's really people who change you if you let them. And I've been lucky enough to have met some beautiful people, and I've been changed. And I've been wrong about a lot of things. I've been right about a few, but I've been wrong about a lot of things. And I guess I weep because I forgot some of that along the way. And I'm embarrassed to think I might share this. I always look at videos, people crying and shit about the cost of 3 bagels and a Gatorade being $28 and then crying on camera. I don't know about that. It's very unbecoming. And I guess I guess it's never too late to learn. And it's not too late for me to turn course. And that's what this death session has been all about, is about trying to change before my own eyes, and I guess before a few eyes out there. But I have to believe it's possible, and I have to change the narrative. You know, Rocky doesn't stay a bum from the neighborhood. He becomes quite well off, and his hair gets blown dry, and he gets a blow dry haircut in 3, and he starts wearing satin jackets, and he's on the cover of Cigar Aficionado, and he gets soft with fame and fortune, and then he has to learn that lesson. And that's why I relate everything goddamn back to fucking Rocky. But these things play out over and over and over, and if you're able to course correct, and it's tough, though. I can't say to you right now that I feel at 47 of these death sessions that I've made some progress in that. I've read my script out loud. I rented space to do so. I'm on a path. I'm doing my work, and I'm feeling better, but I guess this is the they talk about it in the War of Art. Stephen Pressfield, he talks about the Odysseus myth, about how there's land in sight for Odysseus. And he's like, and they're all excited. They're about to be home. And he says, you know what? I'm tired. Let me know when we make landfall. I'm going to go down below and have a nap, taking his eye off the proverbial ball of making it home. And while he's away, asleep in his captain's quarters or whatever, the mice will play when the cat is away, and and they dig into his, I forget what the actual machination of the story is, but there's some bag that's like an off, don't open this fucking bag, and in the bag is the ill winds. And the ill winds are released because he wasn't there, and he was right there. He was at the shore practically. And the ill winds blew him off course for another 10 years. And in the War of Art, Stephen Pressfield talks about, and they talk about it in marathons, that the last, 24, 25, 26, those are the rough miles, man. And when you're changing, and when you're hoping to turn around from a certain way of thinking for many years, or when you're doing what I'm doing, it gets really hard when you're about to break through. I have to pray and imagine that is what's going on for me right now, as I'm overthinking, over analyzing, and I'm a little sad. I have to cop to that. I'm sad that and It brings up things. And so I just have to remember that it gets tough right before the shore. It gets tough in the last mile. Things get, they say, harder right before breakthrough. You know, you got breakdown and breakthrough. So I'm going to try to leave optimistic, and I wouldn't be on 47 and closing in on 52 if I wasn't getting something out of this in and of itself. It gave me something to do when I was out of town. And anyway, I'm just starting to want to associate with better angels, better entities, and better parts of myself, and then start really taking this set of skills that I believe in, and doing some good with it, and maybe having a good time somewhere along the line. So anyway, have a good week. I'm here, and I'll be back, God willing, and I guess that's what we're here to do, is to keep plugging. All right, keep punching, like Sly says, you know. All right, that's Session 47. Carl D out.